Boa noite. Você assiste a partir de agora o Espaço Público, programa de entrevistas da TV Brasil. Nossa convidada de hoje é Phumzile Mlambo-Ngcuka. Ela foi vice-presidente da África do Sul e hoje é subsecretária da ONU e diretora-executiva da ONU Mulheres. Phumzile tem uma longa trajetória em defesa das mulheres e da ampliação de seus direitos. Como o programa de hoje é gravado, não haverá participação pelas redes sociais. Para participar da conversa em nossos estúdios, convidamos Juliana Gonçalves, jornalista e coordenadora do Centro de Estudos das Relações de Trabalho e Desigualdades, e Dario Pignotti, correspondente dos jornais Página 12 da Argentina e do Le Monde Diplomatique de Paris. Eu sou Paulo Moreira Leite. Boa noite, Phumzile. Queria dizer que nós estamos muito felizes de receber a senhora, com uma trajetória muito respeitável. É uma honra poder ouvi-la, conhecer suas opiniões e tenho certeza que nós vamos fazer um programa muito interessante. Eu gostaria de falar sobre um artigo que a senhora escreveu no dia 8 de março, em que a senhora disse o seguinte: no fim, as mulheres terão igualdade. Por que esperar? Ou seja, a senhora fala disso com uma certeza muito forte, uma convicção muito grande, dizendo assim, esse é o destino. Eu gostaria que a senhora explicasse um pouco essa convicção, porque nós sabemos que os planos, as ideias, os projetos não têm dado certo, ou não têm avançado como a gente esperava, né? Aqueles prazos estabelecidos em conferências anteriores. Por que essa certeza? De onde vem isso?
Well, thank you so much for this opportunity to talk to your viewers. We are convinced that this time we have learned a lot of lessons about what needs to be done to achieve gender equality. As you know, this has been going on for many years and centuries. Women are exhausted of waiting for their rights to be fulfilled. And we cannot have this as an open-ended struggle. We can't have a luta continua. At some point, we have to conquer gender equality because it's good for women, it's good for future generations, and it's good for men. Why are we putting time frames now? It is because we implemented the Beijing platform for the last 20 years. And before that, we did a lot. We implemented the Millennium Development Goals for 15 years. We learned a lot about what works and what doesn't work. We know in Brazil what you did to decrease poverty and that women benefited a lot. We know in Africa that girls' education changes the quality of life of girls. It reduces the infection of HIV/AIDS. It reduces maternal health. We also know that if women have opportunities and economic empowerment, that gives an opportunity for women to move away from abusive men and partners. If we all do all of these things together across the world, we will be able to make fundamental changes. But how can we make governments and private sector do that? We need an agreement. We got this agreement in the Sustainable Development Goals. All of these things are actually spelled out in the Sustainable Development Goals. Are they going to be implemented only if the media, the women, the governments, the civil society, we all work together to make sure that this agreement that everybody has signed into is actually being implemented?
A senhora atualmente trabalha na ONU Mulheres, que foi dirigida pela atual presidenta Michelle Bachelet. O fato de que 3 mulheres na América Latina, nesses momentos, Bachelet, a Cristina Kirchner e Dilma Rousseff, sejam presidentas, está falando de algum bom momento da situação das mulheres na região ou isso apenas é acidente, fato isolado?
It is a good moment. Actually, we need more women to be heads of state in Latin America and beyond. Because in the world today, there's only 20 women who are heads of government and heads of state out of almost 200 countries, surely. There can't be 20 women in the whole world who are good to lead and 180 men versus 20 women. What do you need to be a leader of a country? You must love your people, you must have integrity, you must be honest, you must be dedicated to service. Those are the attributes that are very strong in women as well as in men. This is not a monopoly of men to have these attributes. So having more women in positions of authority, I think, and I know you think, will decrease wars in the world, because women do have a disposition towards making peace rather than making war. If we have more women leading the countries, I think there will be more investment in nutrition.
Eu gostaria de fazer uma pergunta, porque muitas mulheres que ocuparam o poder em anos recentes não cumpriram essa visão progressista que a gente costuma enxergar. Por exemplo, Margaret Thatcher, na Inglaterra, fez um governo de exclusão social. A primeira-ministra da Alemanha hoje, Angela Merkel, é uma das responsáveis por uma situação de empobrecimento, de perda de direitos, inclusive das mulheres na Europa. Como é que a gente combina essas coisas de quando a gente fala que tem que ter mais mulheres, mas como é que dá para... Esse caso aí não é muito positivo, não, né?
Well, I don't know. I think I can agree with you with Margaret Thatcher. I will not agree with you with Merkel in Germany. In fact, right now, we are about to implement the most aggressive law in Germany for representation of women in private sector. A few months ago, Merkel convened a retreat of women around the world to look at specific interventions of women, not just in Germany, but for women around the world. He has been one of the people who opened her arms to, in a difficult situation, to welcome refugees, especially women and children. So I think that it's not perfect, because these women are not really in perfect societies. Societies themselves have got to change. I'm also not saying that all women are good and all men are bad. But I think that the fact that we only have had such few women to lead, we have not even discovered the strength of women. I also think that it's important not to make it a men versus women. It's a people's responsibility. Both men and women together can make the world work better. This exclusive affirmative action for men. Because the world, what is patriarchy? Patriarchy is affirmative action for men. Because we're born a man, you've got privileges. And when people argue against inclusion of women, it's almost like the privilege is not obvious to those who have it. If you sit on the side and you are a man and you are born with a privilege, you do not understand those who don't have it, because you've never been there. But what we're trying to do is to put everybody in the shoes of a woman, to see what it looks like to be on the other side. And then together we find a medium way where both of us can take responsibility.
Phumzile, boa noite. Eu quero, antes de tudo, agradecer a oportunidade de estar aqui e dividir a bancada com uma mulher negra como a senhora. E como é raro esse momento na mídia brasileira de ter duas mulheres negras numa mesa de bancada no jornalismo. E aí, a minha pergunta vem com relação à sua agenda aqui no Brasil, né, que a senhora alterou a sua agenda para participar da Marcha das Mulheres Negras, que aconteceu e reuniu mais de 30 mil mulheres nas ruas de Brasília. Eu gostaria de saber o que a senhora achou da marcha, né, e como a senhora percebe o movimento de mulheres negras no Brasil e como ele pode influenciar os outros países.
Well, I think it was very important and inspiring for me to walk the streets of Brasilia with my sisters, because I have done that for my country in South Africa. In fact, it was nostalgic. It was like the walk that we had to fight for the end of apartheid in South Africa. I think it's also important now and again in the history of nations to have these moments where you attract the attention of everybody to an issue that may seem like an issue of a particular group, but it is an issue for everybody, because an injury to one is an injury to all. I think it was also very good for me that the issue articulated the importance of fighting to end violence against women in general and against black women in particular, and of course for poverty. So it's a good way to start the decade of people of African descent, which is just about to start. And the first of the 5 regional meetings of this decade was going to be in Brazil. So it's good that the women are already organizing themselves so that when the decade starts, they will already have gathered their thoughts about how to make sure that it benefits women significantly. I truly, truly appreciated the privilege to be part of that process.
Como que a senhora vê a questão do racismo que a senhora experimentou na África com o apartheid e na luta contra o apartheid e da forma que o racismo assume no Brasil, onde algumas pessoas chegam a dizer que nós temos um racismo cordial, um racismo que não mostra sua face. Como é que a senhora vê que sim pode enfrentar isso?
It's important that every injustice is fought. Racism, sexism, discrimination of people because of their sexual orientation, discrimination of people because of disability, all of this needs to be fought together all the time. If you remember, if you pass the laws in many countries to end racism, it is one victory. The real victory is when the law is being implemented and embraced by everybody. Long time in the United States, racism was banned and the civil rights movement was able to fight. But we still have racism in the USA. So you have to constantly fight, because what is the impact of that? Black women have more violence in Brazil. Black women in America earn less than a white man, less than a white woman, and everything else that goes with that. In Brazil as well, the income inequality is racially skewed, and all of these are the violation of the human rights that are guaranteed in the Constitution. So we have to address this because it is the right thing to do, because these are human rights, and all of us care about human rights. And we should not turn our eyes the other way when these rights are affecting black women. Because as I say again, an injury to one is an injury to all.
A senhora tem uma formação voltada à política educacional e à educação, né? Os movimentos sociais aqui no Brasil, nós temos uma luta grande para incidir de maneira positiva na educação, seja na luta pela implementação da Lei 10.639, que fala sobre o estudo da África e da cultura afro-brasileira no Brasil, seja por incluir qualquer tipo de debate com a diversidade, né? Recentemente, os planos municipais de educação de várias cidades tiraram a palavra gênero, né, da sua construção. Isso foi um grande debate aqui no Brasil e a cidade de São Paulo, que é uma das maiores, né, é a maior aqui, a nossa maior cidade, tirou a palavra gênero. Como a senhora vê, né, o papel da educação na construção dessa equidade de gênero, nesse contexto?
Education is guilty of entrenching sexism and many other injustices, because we did not teach about them. We did not teach about equality. When we now have an opportunity to actually correct these wrongs, it is important that education plays a critical role. Because what is education? Education is about socialization. When we have more people that come out of school with straight A's, but being very cruel, corrupt, and so on, it means that the education has failed to prepare a citizen to fit in society and be of good service. If we have education and a person comes up with a big doctorate and is the worst sexist person, it means education has failed to make this person to respect fellow citizens in a country. So it is the responsibility of education to contribute towards the harmony of society, men and women, different races, religious tolerance, sexual orientation tolerance. All of these things are actually important. Even being humane, having empathy, and being kind. If education brings out dictators, what is the point of sending a child to school if they are going to come back and all they want to do is to kill other people? I'd rather have a kind person who's uneducated than a highly educated person who is destructive and cruel. So education has to play a role in making our society work better and work for everybody.
Nessa semana, na Marcha das Mulheres Negras, houve protesto contra o presidente da Câmara de Deputados daqui de Brasil, deputado Eduardo Cunha. Aliás, ele é autor de uma série de iniciativas que sectores vinculados com o movimento feminino chamaram de sexistas. A senhora tem informação do atual momento do Parlamento brasileiro e do caso do presidente dele da Câmara de Deputados?
Well, not in much detail, but at the same time, I know enough that when you are elected to be a public representative, you have to stand for public good. It is very worrying when a public representative becomes divisive and values other members of society less. And it is the right of the citizens, especially those who are affected, to take a stand and to call for the respect of their own rights. I think it is even more important, not even those who are not affected by that also come out in solidarity. Part of democracy is about freedom of expression and engagement and disagreeing, as long as it is done peacefully. And I think that it is important, therefore, that the women express themselves. It is important that men of Brazil also support the women. It is important that those that are not affected by such utterances are also in solidarity.
Eu gostaria de ouvir uma pergunta de Jurema Werneck, fundadora da ONG Crioula. Ela gravou uma pergunta para a senhora. Vamos ouvir.
Prezada senhora, nós da Marcha de Mulheres Negras parabenizamos o desenvolvimento da campanha 50-50 para construção de igualdade de gêneros, igualdade entre homens e mulheres no ano de 2030. Nós da Marcha de Mulheres Negras perguntamos de que forma esta campanha pode contribuir para que a igualdade de gêneros inclua as mulheres negras, inclua igualdade para as mulheres negras.
UN Women has called for 2030 to be the expiry date from impunity in gender inequality, for substantive equality, for attaining some key milestone in gender equality that are irreversible. And so, which means that every year we are going to be looking at the different interventions that are addressing gender equality. And Brazil is going to be chairing the CSW in March next year, where we will kickstart this effort. And in looking at that, we want countries to domesticate the different kinds of injustices in their own countries that affect women. In those countries where we have racial issues, looking at how you are going to achieve this substantive equality must also mean that you have articulated how this is going to benefit all women, black, white, indigenous, and so on. So in the context of Brazil, in the context of many other countries where there's ethnic discrimination, we would also look at what we call the intersectionality of rights, because we recognize the fact that you have got to unpack the different disadvantages, and we will name specifically what needs to be done in the context of addressing racial inequality as well as gender inequality together. So don't worry, my sister, the focus is going to be there on black women as well.
Vários estudiosos dizem que a Islândia é o país onde existe a maior igualdade ou a menor desigualdade entre homens e mulheres no mundo. Eu li isso numa pesquisa que estou fazendo para vir para cá para entrevistar a senhora. A senhora consegue explicar por quê? Por que na Islândia, que é uma ilha pequenininha, rica, por que ela é assim? A senhora conhece? Tem alguma explicação?
Iceland, rather. Maybe because it's an island. No, well...
Inglaterra também é.
They are not contaminated by too many other forces. Actually, it is really sad that 2015, there is not a single country in the world that has attained gender equality. Iceland is the country with the highest indicators for gender equality. Well, they have implemented some significant laws dedicated to equality. One, they were the first country to have the woman president, and she served for 3 terms. Tick. Women president, good for gender equality. They also focused on the sharing of unpaid care work between men and women. They were the first countries to facilitate the participation of men in child caring, incentivizing paternity leave, and ensuring that both men and women were rewarded for playing a significant role as parents. They also made sure that the tax laws of the country supported women's independence, so that women were not seen as an extension or as dependents of men. And also, they also made sure that they invested in the education of women significantly. But the breaking away of the stereotype at the home and the sharing systematically of the work at home between men and women has been very significant. And sometimes we think this is a cute thing to do. It actually is quite fundamental, because the large number of women in the world who are unable to prosper is just because they are mothers. Because motherhood actually chains them to the home and does not enable them to go out and to do what they can do as citizens. But when men and women share this, you actually neutralize the negative impact on women. The ILO calls this the motherhood penalty. In the fullness of life, in middle-income country, women will lose between 30 to 70% of their earnings just because of being a mother. Some of it because of opportunities they cannot take. Some of it because of underpay. Right now, the women are paid 24% less than men on a global average. If you're black women, it's even less. So Iceland has addressed, but they have not addressed unequal pay. They are now working on this. But they have addressed all of these things. And their president, who was a woman, for her, the equality of women was a priority. That improved their economy. That ensured that the health and well-being of the country and its people increased. Two things that they have not been able to address, though: violence against women is still a problem. That's a global problem from the richest to the poorest country. And they are now seized with that. They are focusing a lot on unequal pay and ending violence against women. And they are our he for she. The president is a he for she, and he has chosen those two things as the two things that he wants to fight against.
Recentemente saíram os dados do mapa da violência, que mostrou que a violência contra mulheres negras aumentou em 54%, né? Que a cada 1h30 uma mulher negra morre. Né? E
aqui no Brasil?
Aqui no Brasil, exatamente. E, enfim, o movimento social fica muito se perguntando, porque como esse debate do racismo ainda é muito difícil fazer em todas as esferas da sociedade, e quando a gente fala da violência não é diferente, eu gostaria de saber qual que é o papel da ONU Mulheres mesmo, nesse campo de mediações, né? Já que, como a senhora colocou, é impossível chegar nessa equidade sem enfrentar o racismo, e o racismo no Brasil é uma questão de sobrevivência, né? Porque nós estamos morrendo por conta do racismo também.
Well, in part, the fact that you publish the data is very important. We have to make the leaders accountable for reducing the incidents based on the data that we already have. It does mean that also, as we were collecting the data, we were able to tell where and how does the problem occur. So we therefore should know how to implement solutions, because we know where the problem is coming from. Law enforcement is a problem in many countries. So we need to invest more in the implementation of good laws that should be protecting the women. Education is important. More black children, more black women must be able to get education so that they are able to stand for themselves, to defend themselves, and to become role models. The media in Brazil must project black women and black people in a more positive light, in a more frequent basis. It should not be isolated incident, because the media is part of the solution. It has a very important and an honorable role to play in this situation. And of course, investment in social services and social policies that are directed to addressing this issue. All of this has to happen together for an impact to be made. But I think I am quite encouraged that the study is there. There is the data. You have a baseline to begin with. All of us, UN Women, we are partnering with the government of Brazil to make sure that there is a response to this study. I'm also encouraged by the fact that the government is taking on the issue of femicide. I was encouraged yesterday when I was talking to the president about how she is determined to make sure that the violence against women in Brazil, and the violence against black women in particular, is decreased systematically.
Eu queria colocar uma questão que acho que a senhora acompanha, que o programa Bolsa Família, que é um programa de atendimento às populações muito pobres no Brasil, ele criou um sistema que ele deu poder às mulheres. Porque são as mulheres que recebem a contribuição do governo, são elas que administram esses recursos. Eu queria saber até que ponto que a senhora considera que isso também é uma forma de ampliar o poder das mulheres positivamente, dar para elas um lugar mais importante na família, uma posição melhor, até socialmente. A senhora concorda com isso?
Well, women have an important role in the family, even without money. They will always play an important role because they are the first line of defense for the children in the family and the old people, and they're the last line of defense. If you go to maintenance courts, where people go to complain about children that are not being maintained by their parents, it is mostly women who are looking for fathers to maintain the children, not men who are looking for women to maintain the children. Because whenever women have got the resources, the first thing that they do is to invest it in the well-being of the family. So it is a rational thing to do, to entrust women with the family silver, because it is going to be spent in the best interest of the family. Also, if we really want to decrease poverty from generation to generation, the channel to do that is women, because women are able to invest, for instance, in education of the children. And once those children come out of poverty, they will also break the cycle for the next generation. So from generation to generation, you actually reduce the cycle of poverty in the country overall. It is not always like that with guys who will chill with the money, where else the women will actually use the money in the best interest of the men. They will make sure that this man eats, even if she does not bring the money, and she will also make sure that the children are fed, that the children go to school, and that the children have got medical protection.
Na África do Sul, que tem programa parecido, são as mulheres que administram dinheiro também?
Absolutely, and they spend it very well. I do so myself.
Na América Latina, os países com maioria de população negra são poucos. Acho que o único onde claramente isso acontece é em Brasil e em Cuba. Agora, na América Latina também tem a realidade da discriminação dos indígenas e das mulheres indígenas. A senhora, como uma especialista na matéria, poderia nos dar uma característica particular sobre a forma em que é discriminada a mulher indígena e a forma em que é discriminada a mulher negra?
Well, I think there's lots of similarities about the experiences of indigenous people and black women, and black people in general. In fact, actually, the economic well-being in the first instance is what deprives these communities of their strength to self-determine. The disrespect of the culture of the people, which disorient the people, the taking away of land and natural resources which are very important for indigenous communities. All of these are part of the problems, and you need the laws to protect indigenous people, to protect their culture, to make sure that you cannot have business interest taking over the benefits that should be accruing to indigenous people. And in many cases and in many communities, indigenous people are also custodians of the environment. Whenever you undermine their culture and their rights, there's always a risk that the environment is also being compromised and undermined, because they have a way of looking after the environment for the benefit of us all. So you need zero tolerance to this kind of discrimination in every country.
E tem uma característica também importante, que talvez seja comum, que muitas vezes as forças repressivas do Estado são especialmente agressivas também contra os indígenas na América Latina, né?
Yes, and that is why, again, I will go back to legislation and protection of people, because these are crimes. When crimes are committed against black people, crimes of a racial nature, crimes against women, crimes against indigenous women, we should actually treat them as crimes and not treat them as cultural patterns, because you soften the heaviness of the crime. The crime is a crime, and a right is a right, and it must be equal to everybody.
Voltamos em instantes com a diretora da ONU Mulheres, Phumzile Mlambo-Ngcuka. Não saia daí. O Espaço Público está de volta com Phumzile Mlambo-Ngcuka, diretora-executiva da ONU Mulheres. Phumzile, eu gostaria que você falasse um pouco sobre suas ideias de desenvolvimento sustentado, que é um ponto de vista diferente de como é que as sociedades precisam se desenvolver para que elas possam atingir realmente os seus objetivos, inclusive a igualdade das mulheres. Como é que é isso? Como é que a senhora fala quando fala disso?
The Sustainable Development Goals are different from the Millennium Development Goals in that they emphasize shared prosperity between countries. They are addressing inequality between countries and inequality within countries. In the case of Brazil, Sustainable Development Goals will expect us to address inequality between Brazilians, black and white Brazilians, rich and poor Brazilians, male and female Brazilians, and like that in every country. The Sustainable Development Goals are also focusing on climate justice and our common responsibility from all over the world to look after the planet. Because we have one planet, there's no plan B as far as the planet is concerned. No planet B, we just have planet A. And it highlights, in Brazil, of course, because of the forests here, you've got a significant role to play, not just for yourselves, for the world, to protect climate, to avoid a climate disaster. Because we say we are the last generation with a real possibility to reverse the impact of climate change. So the goals are very strong on that. They talk about how we should use the resources on Earth and even the resources in the sea and the resources underwater. It also situates gender equality front and center. In every of the 17 goals, there's a focus on indicators and the impact on women, whether we're talking education, health, the use of the economy, whether we are talking about industry, climate, and so on. And then, of course, we've got a goal that is dedicated to women. It is much more stronger than what we had in the Millennium Development Goal. The goal for women talks about ending violence against women, talking about decreasing unpaid care work. It talks about equal participation of women, because that's one of the biggest problems, equal participation. It talks about access to reproductive rights and as well as services. It also talks about ending cultural practices that are harmful to women and girls, such as child marriage, such as female genital mutilation, such as this high rape of women and girls in particular. So again, the good thing, all the countries adopted these goals unanimously. So it is binding to every country in the world.
Vão só adotar?
It depends on us. It depends on us. We have a role to play, because who are they adopting it on all our behalf? If we agree that is the good thing to do, whether we are civil society, whether we are media, whether we are public servants, we all have to do our part. I must add, if you look at the Millennium Development Goals, we did benefit from those goals. The world is better because of the Millennium Development Goals. We reduce poverty, we reduce maternal health maternal deaths, we reduce infant mortality, we increase the education of girls, we passed many laws that protect girls, we reduced HIV and AIDS infection. So this peer pressure between countries does work. It works better when the society in those countries also is actively supporting and holding government accountable. When black women are marching and demanding their rights, these are some of the ways in which you make these goals work.
Eu vou pedir licença a meus colegas para fazer uma pergunta que não é exatamente sobre racismo e mulheres, mas a senhora é uma representante importante da ONU, né? E nesses dias estamos acompanhando o impacto noticioso dos ataques terroristas em França. A revista Le Figaro publicou uma pesquisa na qual mais de 80% dos franceses falam que eles preferem sacrificar liberdade para ter mais segurança. E uma candidata muito forte, a candidata Le Pen, tem falado que se ela for eleita presidenta, impulsará a expulsão dos imigrantes. E até o próprio presidente Hollande falou que até os imigrantes que tinham dupla cidadania poderiam ser retirados da cidadania francesa. A senhora teme que na França e na Europa em geral brote de xenofobia e de odeio racial contra os imigrantes depois dos fatos da última sexta em Paris?
Well, we are the United Nations. We are about the unity of nations, not the discrimination of nations. We need to address the issues around terrorism in a manner that does not make the world a world that is full of more hatred. So for us, it's the United Nations. It is actually important, for instance, that we stop the war in Syria, that we find acceptable ways of resettling the people of Syria, both back into their country, but also accommodating them in countries where they are seeking refugees. But also, countries must step up their security and protect themselves. The two are not mutually exclusive. Making the countries secured and being humane is not the opposite. We need to do both and do it at the same time. It is also very important for us to understand that we have collective security responsibility. When one country is going through the war, none of us is safe, even if the country is not fought in our side, because as we know, refugees, as well as sometimes those that will cause insecurity, will travel all over the world. So when we see a war coming, we must be concerned about finding peaceful means of resolving it. But some of the wars also have to do with the lack of freedom in the countries of origin, the lack of economic possibilities. We have to be concerned about how we make sure that we have common prosperity. And this is what is being emphasized in the Sustainable Development. Because where there isn't prosperity in one part of the world, there will be no prosperity everywhere in the world.
Mas tem temor de brote de xenofobia nesse momento em particular em França e na Europa?
Well, there is a challenge of not all people in Europe are against migrants. We have seen the generosity of different countries, and for many years they have accommodated. But yes, in these countries we've got right-wing politicians who sometimes inflame the feelings of the people. It's a mixed picture, like everywhere else. You've got people that are very much full of solidarity, but you also have people who are very discriminatory. And I wouldn't like to single the people of France as being the worst or the better. It's a mixed bag everywhere in the world.
Leis como essa que ele citou, né, que restringiriam os imigrantes em países da Europa, ou aqui no Brasil, como a redução da maioridade penal, que está em discussão e que nós sabemos que afeta de maneira particular jovens negros, né, que são encarcerados de maneira sistemática. São possíveis leis que não só descumprem, aqui no Brasil, no caso da redução da maioridade penal, descumprem o ECA, né, o Estatuto da Criança e do Adolescente, como ferem acordos internacionais que o Brasil já é signatário. Como a senhora vê esse tipo de ação acontecendo dentro do país, tanto aqui quanto na Europa? E como é o plano de ação da ONU, né, quando vê que, às vezes, as comunidades, os países, caminham para ações que estão ferindo já esses tratados internacionais que já são signatários?
The United Nations, when it comes into issues of incarceration, of offenders, emphasizes correctional services as against punishment. Punishment is also necessary in some cases, but correction is even more important. Also, the sentences of the people must be proportional to the size of the crime. If you put people into incarceration for very minor crime instead of investing in their correction, you risk making them even stronger criminals, because once you throw them into the jail system, chances are that they're going to come out even worse. So the emphasis of the United Nations is about countries must adopt correctional measures that invest in the reintegration of people back into society with new social skills, new social attitude, more social workers and less jailers in order to solve the problems. And more education.
Eu gostaria de fazer uma pergunta mudando bastante de assunto. É sobre uma decisão da chamada primeira revista masculina do mundo, a Playboy norte-americana, que decidiu que a partir do ano que vem não vai mais publicar imagens de mulheres despidas. Essas imagens das mulheres nuas fez parte assim da transformação da sexualização da mulher, da opressão feminina, da mulher sendo tratada como objeto, a sexualidade dela como sendo uma coisa para servir ao homem, né? Eu pergunto se a senhora vê alguma relevância nessa decisão ou é apenas um sinal dos tempos, é uma coisa que inevitavelmente iria acontecer?
Right now, we have women who are being trafficked. We have women who are being raped. We have perpetrators of all of those crimes falling out of the net, not being reprehended in any way. Anything that restores the dignity of women is important. Parading women naked for the pleasure of men is unacceptable. It degrades the dignity of women. If you are going to sell a car and you have to put a naked woman next to a car, you don't put naked women, naked men next to a TV in order to sell a TV. This is another form of discrimination against women. Women are demanding and require, and society requires, a dignified way of treating women by the media. I mean, I don't want, I'm struggling here to compliment Playboy because it's very difficult to compliment, but it's a good thing that they are stopping it. It's difficult to compliment them even when they do the good thing. I wish they did not exist.
Falando nisso, eu não formularei uma pergunta porque a senhora já respondeu, mas gostaria de contar uma breve história acontecida há pouco em Colômbia, onde uma revista masculina também, revista Soho, publicou uma capa na qual uma ex-guerrilheira das Farc, nua, junto com uma ex-agente de inteligência. E eu, estando lá, perguntei para uma pessoa muito bem informada sobre as Farc, e ela falou para mim, olha, os caras da Farc, mesmo que eles trabalham e lutaram pela revolução, são muito machistas mesmo. Eu não sei se isso inspira na senhora algum comentário.
Well, it is true. Men are sexist and have machismo from all walks of life. Being a fighter and being a FARC member does not excuse you from being...
No exército, na guerrilha mesmo.
Eu queria perguntar para a senhora, Nelson Mandela era machista?
Well, you just have to follow his writings and his defense for women. In fact, he is on record for having said, until such time that women are free, the world cannot be free, and that we can gauge the quality of freedom of any country by the way the country treats its women, its children, and all of its people that need to be defended. If a country does not treat those people that well, the country cannot call itself free and dignified. So he really has been a strong advocate for women's empowerment. And as you could see in our country, the appointment of women after his presidency increased a lot. And he fought inside the party to make sure that he fought. The party wasn't always kosher on it. He had to fight in order to make sure that the party turned its policy, and gladly it was adopted. But I just want to go back to the issue of ISIS, for instance. The sexualization of their military doctrine is just amazing. The targeting of women as sexual slaves, Boko Haram and the Chibok girls in Nigeria, the fact that their focus was to get girls, to sell them so that their reproductive rights can be suppressed and then can be sold as slaves to men. There is something between violence and terrorism and over-sexualization, which is a big problem. And that is why we have to make sure that when we fight terrorism, we also look at what it is doing to women, and we fight it in a manner that is also protecting women. In many countries where there are wars, it is more dangerous to be a woman and a girl than to be a soldier. Because a woman is unarmed, is not a combatant, and she's abducted, and for the rest of her life, if she's captured, she's actually enslaved because she's a woman. So machismo and guerrilla fighting, sometimes they go together.
Existe uma diferença que a maioria das pessoas concorda entre homens e mulheres, que é a maternidade. As mulheres têm filhos, os homens não têm. Podem criar filhos, pode ajudar, mas essa questão é uma diferença. E a senhora tem 3 filhos. E a senhora tem uma vida autônoma, política, a senhora hoje é uma liderança mundial. E assim, sem entrar, eu queria entender um pouco como é que se fez para combinar isso. Porque 3 filhos não é um filho, são 3 filhos, 3 educações, 3 histórias. Como é que combina isso? Porque é uma questão que muitas pessoas têm dificuldade. A senhora tem uma vida independente, né? Como é que foi isso? Como é que a senhora conseguiu ser mãe de 3 filhos e...
I did not cope. And one thing that I regret very well is that I shortchanged my children in order to fight for the liberation of my country. I live with that regret. And it's something, a message I would send to many men and women. Always make sure that you have the work-life balance, because you can never regain the time that you lose with your children. The liberation of a country is not above the love of a child. It's very important to do that. But having said that, in many countries and in many situations, it is the women who are looking after the children most of the time. That is also a problem, because it denies the man the opportunity to be a good father and a good parent. And more men who spend time with their children are less abusers and they are less violent. So this is an investment for us to fight violence against women. It also ensures that women have got the capacity to fulfill their own potential, to fulfill their own dream, and to be full citizens. So it is the responsibility of private sector, of government, to provide affordable child care, especially for poor women, so that women are able to balance between looking after the children and having an economic life. It is also important that men have paternity leave. And that is also recognized as something that makes a strong man is a man who cares for the children. There is no contradiction between a strong guy and a good father and a caring father. And sometimes we think that to be a strong man, you have got to have no feelings and no emotions. Actually, this is one of the biggest problems of patriarchy, which has made the world to be more violent and men to be less caring, because we almost make it as if it is a shameful thing for a man to be caring. We do not facilitate opportunities for men to be caring. And the He for She campaign, which we have launched as UN Women, which encourages men to take a stand on gender equality, is exactly about creating a platform for men to come forward and to exhibit positive masculinity. And that kind of masculinity is the kind of masculinity that will bridge the gap between men and women when it comes into healthy and loving families.
E o papel da creche, né, do acesso à educação infantil para as crianças, também é fundamental, né, para assegurar essa liberdade da mulher poder voltar ao mercado de trabalho, né? O que a senhora pensa sobre isso?
Yes, well, I definitely agree with you. And we have to create a policy environment that makes it possible, because the way the world is structured, it was structured as if women don't exist. You know, there's this thing called a baby, which exists in every country. And that thing called a baby is created by a man and a woman. But the person who has the responsibility in most of our countries is only one person. The laws of many countries take it for granted that the woman has got capacity to stay at home without being paid and to look after the baby. The man is expected to go out and to bring and to earn money for himself, which she doesn't have to share with the babies and the woman. And yet it is the woman who's expected to look after the baby. So it is the laws and the way society thinks it has to change. Sometimes we think women must change. Women are doing things the way they're supposed to be done. It is the laws and society that is not ready for women to exist, not ready for the fact that children come out of men and women. 80% of men in the world are biological fathers. We don't have 80% of men who are good fathers. That is something that we have to take care of.
Eu gostaria de perguntar para a senhora o que a senhora acha da legalização do aborto. É uma reivindicação de vários do movimento feminista no Brasil. O que a senhora pensa disso?
Well, women must have a right to determine what happens to their body. Governments and society must provide a healthy, enabling, safe environment for women to make these decisions. If governments do not provide the right laws and the right environment, it is going to happen anyway. And it is going to happen in unsafe environment, and it is going to increase the suffering in society. So we are fooling ourselves if we think just because you are against it, just because you do not legalize it, it is not going to happen. What you are doing is actually to create more dangerous situation for women, and we are disrespecting also the rights of women to choose for themselves.
E temas como esse do aborto mostram muito como a falta desse empoderamento feminino, inclusive na política, faz com que, como nós não temos a caneta na mão, fica difícil avançar em algumas pautas, né? A senhora citou no começo da sua fala, né, quantas líderes, né, mundiais são mulheres, né? Como são poucas, né? Então a senhora considera que essa baixa representação na política ameaça esse empoderamento e essa equidade de gênero que a gente está buscando?
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, in the case of Brazil, for instance, you have a woman president, but you do not have a majority of women in the other sections of authority. So it's actually difficult for one person to do it all, because in a democracy you need other people. So the representation of women must permeate everywhere, in Senate, in Congress, in local authority, in private sector, in communities, because in that way you are able to have decisions that favor both men and women. Latin America has done quite well in the sense that 5 of the countries who are in the top 10 countries that are achieving gender parity are in Latin America. But Brazil is not one of them. Brazil is one of the 4 countries that are at the bottom who have around 10% of representation of women. That is even lower than the global average, because the global average is 22%. So women of Brazil, go out and vote for yourselves. And make sure that you support more women in authority, because this is good for women and the changes that we want for the future generation. I urge you.
Convido a falar mais uma vez sobre a América Latina. Daqui a um ano teremos eleições nos Estados Unidos, país onde tem a terceira minoria é latina. Eu queria sua opinião sobre o pré-candidato presidencial republicano Donald Trump.
Why are you asking me such a question? Look, in any election where there are women, I'm going to stand with women, because I think they will definitely make a better leader. Any leader...
E qualquer eleição?
Sorry?
Qualquer eleição que tiver uma mulher, a senhora vai ser a favor de uma mulher?
The woman has to be very bad for me not to support it. And there are not too many bad women, you know, and a lot of bad men.
Votaría Hillary.
Sorry?
Votaría Hillary.
Well, definitely, that's a much stronger candidate in the view of us in the women's movement. I mean, we're not being biased, but, you know. But any candidate that has disrespect for people of other races, for women, for foreigners, obviously, it is against our own principles as the United Nations to support any utterances like that.
Vice Trump?
Not my favorite.
Eu gostaria que a senhora falasse um pouquinho sobre as diferenças e as similaridades do Brasil e da África do Sul, porque nós nos espelhamos bastante na África do Sul por meio da figura do Nelson Mandela, que até hoje é muito celebrado aqui no Brasil pelo papel histórico que ele tem pela luta de direitos civis. Ao mesmo tempo, a gente entende que a situação lá também, enfim, tem toda uma questão da pobreza ainda muito forte, e aqui também. Eu gostaria que a senhora falasse um pouquinho sobre os dois países, como a senhora enxerga.
Well, for one, I must tell you that Brazil has also inspired South Africa a lot. I'll just start, you know, the liberation theology of Brazil was very critical for the liberation of South Africa, because our churches in South Africa learned a lot out of that. They embraced it, and they preached it in South Africa. And that mobilized a lot of Christian people in order to. So you are responsible for something that was very positive in our own countries. Also, the role of Brazil in the formulation of social policy has been very interesting for us as South Africans because we had so much social policy to rethink after apartheid. We sent lots of delegations here to Brazil to actually learn.
Infelizmente, chegamos ao final. Eu queria agradecer a Phumzile Mlambo-Ngcuka, esse nome difícil para a gente pronunciar, mas eu queria agradecer a sua simpatia, o seu sorriso para dizer coisas importantes sem nunca dar uma simpatia, dar um sorriso, fazer uma ironia. Agradecemos também a jornalista Juliana Gonçalves e ao Dario Pinhotti. Para saber mais sobre o Espaço Público, entre no site da TV Brasil. E na semana que vem, temos um novo encontro marcado na terça-feira, às 11 da noite, com mais um Espaço Público. Até lá!